Hello and welcome to It's No Secret. I'm Christine.
And I'm Kat.
And today on the podcast, we're answering the question of why do 20-somethings feel like they can't afford to have kids? Now, this is a conversation that Kat and I have both had individually with other people recently. So we thought, what a perfect opportunity to jump on the pod and have a conversation about it, with me being in my 20-somethings and Kat being just over that / having a kid now. So yeah, a good viewpoint on both sides
Absolutely.
around this topic.
Yeah.
So any kind of initial starting thoughts?
Yeah, I think the one place I'd like to start is I had this conversation with someone that listens to the show, and I'm sure she's going to listen to this episode. And it was really cool because we were talking about the fact that she's getting a little bit more serious with her partner, and they'd been having lots of conversations about money and doing all the really good things that we would totally suggest people do, and talking about their goals and what they're working towards. And then she made the comment that they are not really sure about kids and starting a family because they feel like they're not going to be able to afford them because everything feels so expensive. And I think that upon reflection, that's a really sad place to come from. It's a really heavy decision for people. I think, when did 20-year-olds start feeling the crippling burden of deciding whether or not they can have children due to the fact that the world is really expensive. And then, also I guess just highlighting how much of our life choices are either directly or indirectly impacted by money, whether we kind of acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, definitely.
And I know that I probably fall a little bit into this category of we wanted to have done a lot of things before having a baby, which we were lucky enough to do. Most of that, I think, really was around being in a good position in our relationship and having travelled and spent time together and all that kind of stuff, and less around things like necessarily having a house or a certain amount of money in our bank account. But there is also the thing, weighing in the back of your mind of well, once I have this expense in my life, I can't get rid of it. So I also can't really just reduce it. Yeah. In fact, it just gets more and more expensive. So, and that's a unique thing to have happen. Yeah. I feel I was going to say, do you have the same thing with pets, but not really?
No, because also their lifespan
diminishing cost in a pet.
A lot shorter.
I know. As opposed to, I feel like children are an exponentially rising cost.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly, they are school. Exactly. Yeah,
and for most part, it's at least 18 years.
Because I have kids, but I don't know, so I'm going to leave you to speak on that one.
But so I think that's probably the starting point. Is I guess I just want to highlight that it doesn't pass me by that this is obviously a fairly heavy topic for some people because they do potentially feel the financial burden. But after brainstorming on what we would talk about with our lovely colleague Sunny, I feel a little bit more lightened by it because she was like, "This is great, kids are awesome. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom." So hopefully there's some positive things that we talk about today as well.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, in the same kind of note around talking to people about this, my conversation is kind of similar, but also more around the biological clock and being at the point where maybe you're edging towards 30, 32, 34, and maybe you're not ready for kids, and so what is the cost with that? But then are you not ready because you feel like you're in a bad, quote unquote bad financial situation, or you're not where you want to be, or you haven't done those things that you set out to do? So I guess it's kind of a conversation around like letting go of control around set timelines of when to and not to
when
have
to
kids,
do things.
basically.
Yeah.
So
I think we should chat about some stats, because I love that you've found some stats here. So, earlier this year, Monash University in Australia reported that a quarter of young people were pessimistic about having a family, and many people are probably aware that New Zealand and Australia's birth rates have been dropping quite a bit in recent times, and in a single year between 2019 and 2020, birth rates dropped 3%, although I definitely feel like there's probably been a post-COVID baby boom. That's a whole other factor.
Are you living proof?
Yep. But then we also know that the age in which people are having children is a lot later in life, and that women are either choosing to not have children at all or having fewer of them in general. So that's been a trend that's been been continuing for quite some time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that is also a trend that is not just New Zealand, it's consistent across the world
Yep.
in places like Australia, Canada, the UK and the US as well.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've got some theories on why people are stressed about this in their 20s. And you can tell me if I'm wrong because I'm not in my 20s anymore. But I think the number one thing is probably because the housing market feels really ridiculous. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you think about our parents, right, and they were like, we're going to start a family and we'll be able to house our family quite comfortably because a house is $200,000 and we can afford that even with 15% interest rates on our salaries and pay that off, and that will be okay. There's a very high inherent level of comfort in that scenario that enables you to say, yes, we'll be okay and we can do this thing. I would say a lot of 20-year-olds and even 30-year-olds right now don't have that same level of inherent comfort when it comes to, well, if I bring children into the world, am I 100% going to be able to house them in the way that I want to and secure us in a way that I'd envisioned? Maybe not.
yeah, I was just thinking, well, what is security? Because,
Yeah.
You can have a home and have this asset and consider that quote unquote secure, but if your relationship isn't stable, is that going to have more of an impact on the kid than the house that you're in?
Definitely.
There's there's a lot of other factors
There are.
contrary to that, right?
Yeah.
But you do make a good point, and then I think also as Kiwis we are very attached to the idea of owning property, and so that being a milestone of, well, this to me is
it's a non-negotiable. It's a must-do. It's a natural must-do before I think about having children. And then when that seems really out of reach, it is feasible to feel like, well, maybe having children then is out of reach.
Exactly. And it's also kind of like a marker of success in a lot of people's eyes. I'm financially successful, I'm secure, you said. So... so
I think that's definitely playing into it. And there's no right or wrong exact answer to that. There are plenty of places where there are thriving renting, thriving communities where renting is the norm, and I'm pretty sure they all have children, so it's not like those countries just don't have kids. So it could potentially be a mindset shift that needs to happen. But yes, I definitely also think the rising cost of living is a factor. And I would say, and maybe I'm going to put this to you, Christine, is as someone pre-kids, when you think about the cost of living, what concerns you?
For me, I guess my head went straight to nappies because that's probably the only thing I know that costs a lot of money. But I think probably those variable expenses. But I honestly go more to what is it going to cost to educate my kids in terms of what kind of school do I want them to go to, or what about university and that kind of thing, and is that the price of that really going to inflate over time? Probably more on that side than the everyday expenses, but there is the obvious also of you're feeding more mouths, so your grocery bill's going to go up, you are running the kids to sports and that kind of thing, petrol, all that stuff that has inflated. But I mean, in the same breath, you can be within your means if you work hard enough, right? And shout out to Corny Manu, who is an Instagram influencer, and she just always shares about her budget hacks and things that she does, because it is kind of economies of scale in the same way, what Ollie and I might spend in a week on our food, you could buy in bulk cheaper elsewhere, and it could equate to the same amount. So I guess it's you make sacrifices where needed.
I think that's a bang on, because I was going to say that I think that having children, when you're not in and this is with anything, when you're not in the situation, it's really hard to envision what you will go without in the situation in the future, whereas at the time when you're just living it, and yes, I will acknowledge that everything does feel very expensive. I just had a lovely weekend on Waiheke and basically used all the fuel in my car, and I was like, damn it, I've budgeted to fill up my car once a fortnight, so I guess we're not going anywhere for the next 7 days. Obviously that's not gonna happen, but you know what I mean. It's life is expensive. But you're right, I think just make do with what you have because it's a necessity.
Totally.
When you're pre-kids and you're thinking about, well, the cost of living is generally a bit more, so I'm not going to go on a holiday this year. That's not a necessity. Whereas at the time, you know, if you're like, well, now I have 2 children and we still want to, you know, feed them good food and all that sort of stuff, like you just make do a bit more.
I think you're
Says
also...
the person that's had a kid for like 5 months. You've been making do for so long, Kat.
I feel like in some ways your values probably change while staying the same, and your non-negotiables become different. So, you know, is a non-negotiable now that everyone has to eat healthy food, or is it that you go traveling?
Yeah.
Or is it, I don't know, that you have enough money in the money in the car, petrol,
fuel in the car,
to go to all these places, and maybe it's a road trip instead of an overseas holiday. It could just be a different version of it, but. Again, shout out to Sunny, who is watching us record this right now. She made a very good point in that I think you'll be surprised at how much kind of external support you will get in that period, whether it's like babysitting the kids, or it's, oh, here, use the clothes that I use for my kids, or let's carpool to the sports. I don't know, things like that you probably don't factor into your quote unquote expense of having children as well. So, well,
yeah, because again, like you don't know how that's going to play out. It's very hard to imagine that being on like the other side of it until it starts actually happening, and then you're like, oh, okay, people really do rally around the whole like it takes a village thing, and it's more than just the help. There is a lot of, I guess, non-monetary help that can impact you positively in a financial sense from people as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Have you found that already?
Yeah, we were really lucky in that we got given so many clothes, like secondhand clothes from people, and I now have given on so many of them, and it makes me so happy. I'm like, this is so great. I'm like, and even stuff that I've bought that Lily's only worn like 4 times. I'm like, yes, have this, because I feel really like, I think because people were so generous with us, it makes you then more, you know, more generous to do the same thing. And so I feel really just, and also you realise how quickly they go through things. So that's been really good. But then even stuff like, you know, the one thing that I've learned is like, children really only like an activity for like 15 minutes, and so filling up your day with like 8 to 10 15-minute activities requires a lot of things in your house. But guess what? Hot tip, they may only like that activity of 15 minutes for 3 weeks, and then after that thing's redundant. And so you do get to the point where you're like, well, I don't want to constantly be buying stuff. I do need to just be okay at accepting secondhand things from people, or borrowing something from someone, or going to the library and borrowing kids' books rather than having all the kids' books, because that's an activity out of the house and something that is like really economical, and is just, you know, that kind of stuff. I think it's well, for me, I didn't know that I was going to do all of that sort of thing before I actually started doing it. Yeah, definitely. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Have you heard of Montessori? Like,
but like I just
what do you think of it? As a real there's a point to what I'm saying here.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, the extent of me doing like any kind of, I don't know, good activities for Lily is like Googling, I don't know, like learning activities for a 4-month-old, and then I read them and it's stuff like, I don't know, get them tin foil out and do this, and I'm just like, no. I saw the other day on the same path, just to paint a picture of the type of parent I am, I saw this really good like food Instagrammer that was talking about giving your kids solids. So like, you know, starting with purees and different types of foods and all this kind of stuff. And there's this thing that I've been told so many times now about like, you should introduce your child to 100 foods in their first year. And I'm like, I don't even fucking know what 100 foods are. Like, I'm sorry, but this is a high bar for me as a mum, step 1. And then step 2 is they're like, you should really put homemade bone broth in all of the purees. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I can literally barely puree a broccoli, let alone create bone broth.
Okay, bone broth is really gross as well. It tastes...
Oh, but also I just sent it to my friend and I was like, just FYI, I'm never going to be a bone broth mum. Like, I just don't have the capacity for that stuff. Yeah. And I think that's also it, is like, you pick the areas in which you're happy to pay for convenience, i.e., I'm happy to buy pouches from the supermarket that have like food. And yes, there will be some things that I can make at home in bulk, but that's not me. But then I'm also the parent that now I'm like, well, I do just want to get the bulk of our books from the library because this seems way better. And you know what? Sometimes she reads a book twice and then she hates it.
Yeah. Yeah, love it. Okay, so the point of why I was bringing this up
Sorry.
that's right, is because I also, gosh, Instagram is just so great for everything. I remember scrolling and seeing how basically in Montessori kind of bringing, I don't know, what is it called, parenting method or something like that, you kind of rotate the toys because they forget about them. And so like if you apply that in an economical sense, that's really economical, just like have a finite number of toys and then rotate them out, hide them for a week and bring them back. And then they'll be like, oh my God, new presents.
Yeah. Someone on the same hack mode, someone also told me this thing of like with kids and when they start to get old enough to want to dress themselves, and you have that challenge of like getting them in appropriate outfits for the weather, but then also just like outfits that, you know, they've got these nice clothes and you want them to wear. And so this parent was like, take photos of the outfits on your phone, because children love scrolling on phones, unless you're an anti-phone, and then this is the wrong podcast for you. Anyway, so children love scrolling on phones, and as they're scrolling through your photo album, they'll see these outfits that they'll be like, oh, that's cool. And then you just start to like brainwash them into thinking that yes, the blue leggings do go with the purple jumper, not the rainbow jumper with like dinosaurs. So I know Parenting Hacks 101 is definitely what you came to this show for, and let's check in with me in like a year's time to see how that's working out.
We've really taken a detour off the highway.
Sorry.
Oh, I think that was my fault anyway.
No, it was fun.
Love this chat though. Little hacks.
Yes. But back to the money side.
Yes.
One of the other points that we were talking about earlier is I think you potentially have longer to save for a baby than you anticipate you do. And I think it's because I said this to someone recently of like the similar thing applies to weddings, whereby often we want to save for a life goal that we know we want potentially before we have our, well, let's say like partner or life set for that. And it's really hard to acknowledge to someone, even if like you're single, to be like, yeah, I'm kind of saving for like these future kids that I'm going to have with this person that I'm not even dating yet. You know, that feels a little bit like kind of crazy. That's okay. You can do that. And I think even if you don't do that, you still have a lot of time once, you know, you find out you're pregnant or you decide as a couple you're going to have children to actually save, you know, enough to kind of get through those first months or time off work and that kind of thing. Yeah,
I guess it comes back to like you will make it work with what you have at the time.
Absolutely.
And whatever that looks like to you.
Well, I'll hit you with my second theory of why people, I think, in their 20s feel a little bit stressed about having kids. Again, at the risk of sounding like an old person, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that Instagram and hustle culture have started to encourage people to think they need to reach a certain level of career success or monetary income prior to doing things like having children and taking time out of the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
I'm that person.
Read between the lines. No. But I do think that that's probably putting pressure on people, right? Because they're like, well, you know, I would say that there's fewer of us that are happy to just say, hey, I can have children and also achieve the career goals that I want and have the confidence they're going to do that, because we know that things like earning potential, your KiwiSaver, your retirement funds, you know, your income and all that sort of stuff is very much so affected by time out of the workforce. And that's something that's really been like, I think, drilled into the minds of like 20 and 30-year-olds now, right? And in quite a negative way. So of course, it's natural to feel quite nervous that you shouldn't go down the path of starting a family until you've reached a certain level of financial success that means you could overcome that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about the psychology behind this and kind of like just letting go.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. Or I guess, you know, well, and the other thing is having the confidence that, yes, even if you do have a child or start a family, you're going to be able to get back to where you wanted to be or get further than that.
And just like,
you know, I think
it's just a different way.
Yeah, we live in a society now where, yes, people are also aware of it. And so, you know, there is no longer the expectation really that like the female is the primary caregiver and is the person that stays at home. And I think for most people, they'd be having discussions around what that looks like in their family, as opposed to just assuming like, Christine, once you decide to have a baby, well, that's you done. Okay, we'll see you when you're 65. It was nice knowing you in your workforce, but bye. Like that doesn't happen anymore. So yeah.
There was also, so recently we went to a conference and it was, well,
Yes.
actually this is a separate one to the one that we went to, but the
Different
CEO
conference.
of the
Tell me more.
FMA basically made a point about, it was kind of along the lines of taking a career break as a female and how, you know, you're also taking a contribution break from your KiwiSaver. So in the same way that you're not getting paid the same amount, you're not accruing and building, compounding your KiwiSaver balance. She talked about, you know, when you do get to that point where you do take maternity leave, often like women, generally speaking, won't put themselves forward for a promotion or something like that because they have like basically kind of counted themselves out already with the fact that they're scared that their employer might then discount them for taking that life break. When really that's an internal fear that you're projecting. And I guess I would ask back in the same way, you know, like is that really the case, or is that something that you're making it out to be?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And in the same way of like, okay, if you're asking the questions, are kids too expensive to have in my early 20s? Have you actually sat down and figured out the numbers, or is it just an idea?
Yeah. I was just going to say that. It's like, this is the whole point of having the conversation, is why don't you go and ask someone that has had children that is not that much older than you and ask them all of those things to allay your fears and see if it actually has played out in the way that potentially you're worried about.
Yeah, so I'll ask you that question.
Okay, what's the question?
Has it played out in the way you are?
Okay, so I do have some thoughts. Well, I mean, as it's probably no surprise to everyone, I really wanted to have money set aside for having a baby so that we could just not be stressed with me not earning an income for a period of time. So that's played out okay. I don't really know how we're tracking in terms of our budget, but I also don't feel like our savings has fallen off a cliff. So I'm like, it's not panic stations. Yeah. Also, I think, you know, upon reflection, again, to the point of like, you don't really know what you're going to spend or how you're going to feel until you're in it and living in it. And I probably counted how many coffees and croissants I would buy in a week and over counted how many times I might get like takeaway, as an example. Or, you know, things like, I don't know, exercise or just generally getting out of the house, like those types of expenses. You know, there's a lot of times I don't actually drive the car that very far because I don't need to, kind of thing. So those types of expenses have been hard. I think in terms of like income and work, I mean, it's just played out fine.
Because like, you're obviously, we're on the pod, you're doing some like work on the side, right? So
I think with that though, that probably for me comes down to having a baby, knowing what you value and how you want your work and like family life to look after having a family. And that's quite hard to answer sometimes prior to having a kid because you don't necessarily know how you're going to feel. But I guess for me, and I would say a lot of my friends that I've had conversations with that don't have children, I very strongly value my career in my life and work and that success, not any more than my family and my child, but enough that it places a relatively high significance in, I guess, our decision-making process. And so that then certainly, I think, eases the financial burden a little bit because I'm coming in with a default of like, well, I am going back to work probably in a full-time capacity. So let's just make that scenario work, however that looks.
Yeah, definitely. Have you found that you've like bought a lot of stuff that you haven't now used? Or
for her?
Yeah. Or are you like quite...
there's definitely some stuff. It's interesting though, it comes in swings and roundabouts. Like there's stuff that we have that we're like, oh my God, this is like the MVP of this thing, of like sleep. Like, you know, stuff that you buy that you're like, oh my God, I've used this so many times. And then other things that you use for like 2 weeks, but you're using it for 23 hours of the day for 2 weeks. Yeah, right. So... it's hard to know.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
I feel like you don't really do that in your own life.
No.
Like it's not like you buy something for yourself that has such a short-lived... But that's also because new parents just have no idea what they're doing. Like there is definitely a period of time where me and one of my friends were like, I will throw any money at the problem. Like I just... I know that I don't have the money in the world to throw at the problem, but like right now I just don't feel like I can cope unless I'm like trying to resolve it. So, you know, that is certainly a strategy that sometimes can be quite stressful.
Yes.
But... it is what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good to know. Actually, and I remember in our How to Budget for a Baby episode, you did have kind of like, I guess, a finite number or amount that you had saved, do you have still a buffer, or like have you used it all? Or
that's a really good question. I
don't have
wouldn't
to say how
recommend
much it
this
is, but-
question. We don't have it because we've just consolidated it into our holiday account.
Oh,
We
nice,
can go on
nice.
holidays. But it's actually worthy that you raise that, because when we did that a couple of weeks ago, I did sit down with Luke and I was like, oh my God, I actually have to figure out when we come back from holidays, like when do I actually have to go back to work? Because there is a finite point at
Yep.
which we will both need to be earning an income.
Yep.
And it's like, you sometimes think like, oh, I'll just go back to work at some point. But this was like, no, there's a deadline at which point we would struggle to live off one income
Yep.
without having the savings. And the option for us was, do we just dip into our emergency funds so we can like chill for a bit more, or do I go back to work in some capacity? And we decided that we did not want to dip into our emergency funds because we thought that was very irresponsible. Now we also have a child that might have
Nice.
emergencies, and we were like, we've been down that path with a cat and that was not good.
Oh yes, I have.
So
the story.
let's not do that with a baby.
Yes, yeah, fair. So in that same question then, like changing your financial habits after having a baby versus before,
Yeah.
in the same way that you might be
Yeah.
like, oh, well, you know, I like
Yeah.
my coffee down the road and I like eating out on
Yeah.
Sundays and whatever else.
Mm.
Do you have, like, would you say that your money habits have changed, or would potentially, if you then needed to save something for something like
Good
education?
question. I think our money habits are the same, but I think there's probably more of an understanding and appetite from the two of us to actually sit down and be like, let's quickly talk on this thing and decide and then move forward,
Yeah.
as opposed to not doing that, or just kind of being like, we'll do it and then figure it out later.
Yeah.
And as an example, so Luke got offered some tradie work recently that is going to be quite a good cash injection, which I was like, ooh, and he didn't really want to do it because he's kind of got a wrist injury, which is a whole other thing, but also I think is just enjoying not working so much. And it kind of was that thing of like, you know, past Kat and Luke probably would have been like, no, it's fine, like we're all cool. But current us is like, no, that's a material amount of money. Also, you'll be very impressed to know that we've decided to put half of it into Lily's investment account.
Nice.
You know, and I think your motivations around
Yeah.
financial decisions are obviously different to what they were prior.
Yeah, yeah. And so in the same way that we were talking about having career ambition, like you could actually argue that after you have a child, you're way more motivated because you've got
Yeah.
more of a purpose and
Yeah.
more of a why, in the
Yeah.
same way that maybe you want to build generational wealth because you've got this thing outside of you that you care
Even
more
like
about.
financial
than
security.
yourself.
I'm like, financial security I think means so much more to me as a general goal now than it did when it was the two of us, because I'm kind of like, well, I'm smart, I could just get a job. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
I could figure it out.
Yeah, I could figure it out. I'd
Yeah.
be fine. Like Luke would be fine. But when you have people relying on you or a sense of responsibility for others, that changes.
It's the same kind of thing. Like, I don't have a mortgage, but maybe if I did, then my financial decisions would be changed,
Yeah.
or I would be less risky or whatever else. It does, kind
Exactly.
of develop.
Exactly. So yes. So I hope that, you know, people don't feel like kids is just a goal that's completely unachievable based on the cost of living in current life. I think, you know, the messages that I would maybe just stick on is like, there's no right way to have children and like afford children. It's really like making it work for you. And maybe it is just coming down to looking at what are your overall goals, and is the timeline or series of events that you're working towards based on some kind of society expectation versus what you actually want to do,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. I would actually really love to hear from people on this topic, because I
Yes,
think
me too.
it's, as we said, it's something that you need to hear the experiences of people that are living it to probably feel a bit more comfortable with the whole situation.
Yeah. So send us through questions, comments, thoughts on Instagram at It's No Secret NZ, or you can head to our website, www.itsnosecretnz.co.nz.
.co.nz.
What's our
Just
website?
Google it. Put it into Google. You'll find it there.
Yeah. Otherwise, we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye.